Now, when buying a new motorbike, there are a few cardinal sins that you can commit when buying one. Number one is buying the cheapest one on the internet. Number two is buying one at night off a total stranger. And number three is buying one that hasn't been run in nearly 10 years. Now, I've done it all in one package. This is the cheapest 2009 Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R that I found on eBay. Okay, so hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, as briefly touched on already, we're going to be looking at my new to me 2009 Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R. This is the absolute cheapest one off the internet. I paid less than £1,000 for this bike, so it is mega cheap. But as always, when buying something cheap now, there is a few reasons. We're going to go over those reasons today, show you a little bit of the bike, which has been aptly named by the previous owner, the Jizz Machine. So I'm not sure if that's kind of a premonition as to how it's been looked after in the past, but we'll give it a quick overview of the bike. Then we're going to run through the plans for the future, because this is actually going to be my new track bike. So we're going to do a series where we progressively work on every aspect of the bike, because as I said, it hasn't been running in nearly 10 years. So there is absolutely no fucking way I am taking this anywhere near a racetrack in its condition, because the ride home was sketchy enough. So we're going to do that kind of like a mini series. So one episode will be the engine, another episode will be the suspension, brakes, etc, until sort of March next year, when we are going to take her down to sort of brand attach test to my local racetracks and see what she's got. So to start off, we will start looking at the engine and the running issues that the bike has. Now, obviously with it being sat for 8 years, there's going to be a hell of a lot of issues with the fueling system, the cooling system, which is just sat over time, allowed to rust, to rot in the system. So we'll have a quick look at those, see what needs to be addressed, and then we'll have a look over the rest of the bike. Okay, starting with the engine. Now, it does run. Surprisingly, the last owner who sold it to me did get it running, but it runs very poorly. I'm assuming that's something to do with the fact that it's probably had fuel sat in the lines for 8 years. Even with a fresh tank of fuel, it still runs like crap. So we're gonna have to do an entire overhaul of this fuel system. That includes tank off, draining the tank. There's a little bit of rust inside the tank as well, so we're gonna have to clean that out and get all the crud out from in there. Check all the fuel lines haven't cracked or corroded. And then finally, we'll get to the fuel injectors, which should be sort of about here behind the frame. We'll take them off. We'll take them to get cleaned properly, to get flow tested to make sure we don't need new ones. And hopefully it should run a bit better, because it does have the FI warning light on the dash. Seen mixed reports online whether that is about the fueling system or whether that is something to do with the exhaust servo on the bike, because this bike does have, believe it or not, an accurate exhaust. It has been slid down a track, so it's not in the best condition, and it probably could do with a new one, but for what I'm using it for, which is again track work, it's absolutely perfect. Now, as part of the bike having that accurate exhaust, there is a little secondary valve in the exhaust, which essentially on the standard exhaust, take a shot every time you say exhaust, opens up and makes the bike louder. So it's kind of just a noise dampening thing. Quite common on bikes. It's quite common to have this issue if you do put aftermarket exhausts. It's just whether you've dealt with the issue properly, which I was told it had been, but evidently not. So we'll see if it is the fueling system, and if not, then we'll move over to the exhaust. And of course, we'll carry out sort of our usual servicing items, such as flushing the engine, flushing the radiator, because as the bike's been left over time, crap, gunk, moisture builds up in all the fluids above and just totally wrecks the system. So it's always a bit of a risk buying a bike like this, but fingers crossed, we should come out on top and have a really good track bike for next year. Now, whilst we're on the subject of doing an engine flush, one of the reasons that I wanted to do the engine flush in the first place was because when this bike was advertised, the guy selling it thought that the head gasket might have gone. It had no running issues before it was put away, so I kind of found it difficult to believe that it would just develop a head gasket issue just sitting there. Now, what these bikes can do is over time, as moisture builds up in this crankcase and there's no heat to burn off the moisture that builds up, over especially a prolonged period of 8 years, that moisture can mix with the oil and cause that milky oil effect that you would sort of expect to see with a head gasket issue. Now, I don't really believe that's the case. I think the head gasket hasn't gone. I think it's just a case of the oil mixing with moisture over time. Because if you look at the oil cap, you can see that on there, it is sort of a little bit of a milky consistency, but it's not super thick like you'd expect when a head gasket goes. So I'm going to flush the system, refill it with oil twice, just to kind of flush out all the old crap that's inside the engine while we flush it. And then fingers crossed, we'll kind of look out for that head gasket issue continuing. And then fingers crossed, it's not a head gasket issue, but even if worse comes to worst, and it is a head gasket issue, that'll just have to be another video. So swings and roundabouts, we'll get it sorted, and before you know it, should be good to go. Now, issue number 2 is the suspension. With the bike not being touched for 8 years, the fork seals have gone dry, have gone cracked, and have just leaked all the fluid out of the forks. So even trying to test ride this bike, the bike was basically undrivable. That partnered with, I'm pretty sure that the headstock bearings have also gone. This thing is absolutely a death trap on wheels at the moment. There is absolutely no turning ability, and when you do, because of the headstock bearing issues, it's got nothing, and then all of a sudden, it tries to throw you around the corner. So mega dangerous at the moment. I imagine these forks haven't really seen any work for nigh on 10 years. So really that is a really big issue that we've got to address. Not sure whether I'm going to consider rebuilding them myself yet. I'm not sure whether it's just easier to send it to someone who knows what they're doing, because I've never rebuilt forks on a Ninja before, so not my specialty. With the headstock bearing though, we'll take all the yokes out. Once we've got the forks out, we'll clean it up, maybe put a new bearing in it if it needs it. It's quite often that the grease has just gone, and that's why it has that notchy feeling on the ball bearings. But for now, my plan is to strip the forks out, do the headstock bearing, and at the same time also give the rear shock a service, because again, the bike's been sat, not on paddock stand, so that suspension's been compressed all that time for 10 years. So really the suspension is in need of a full overhaul. Now, I don't want to go too in depth with this at first in sort of the beginning of my sort of track time. So I'm not going to bother upgrading the forks. I'm not going to put a fancy Nitron rear shock on it. For now, I just want to get used to track time, me being on the bike, and then as time sort of goes over next year, we can keep the series going and chuck a few upgrades on the bike and sort of keep working with it that way. Now, while we're down at the front, the next thing to talk about is the tyres. These are stamped the 11th week of 2015, so they are well over 10 years old. They are cracked, the rubber is super hard, there's almost no give in it anymore. So these are not roadworthy tyres. That paired with the horrible suspension, you can kind of see why this bike was almost uncontrollable when driving it. So again, it's another thing that needs to be replaced, which really is a shame actually, because these tyres are basically brand new. And ooh, that feels pretty nasty as well. Which actually ties me nicely on to the next part, which is the braking system. As you can imagine, with brakes not really being touched for that amount of time, all the rubber seals, all the fluid, all the pistons kind of get seized, worn, and just wear out through lack of use. So I'm going to be undertaking a full rebuild of the entire braking system. So new lines, caliper rebuilds, new discs, new pads, everything it needs to make sure that it's safe for next year. And of course, I'll kind of walk you guys through all that process, what I'm doing. So yeah, there's quite a lot of work to crack on with this bike already. Now, next up is the chain and sprockets. To get this bike sort of moving and running, the previous owner has put new sprockets and a new chain on it, but this is the cheapest, shittest eBay chain that you can possibly find. There is no way I'm taking this on the track. So part of the sort of drivetrain upgrades that we're going to do is we're going to completely overhaul this end of the system. So we'll get some nice renthal sprockets, a nice DID chain, one that's properly made for the track and, you know, has a little bit more strength behind it, so I have a bit more confidence when I'm out. And again, you can kind of see the sort of cheap, shitty stickers that have been plastered all over this bike. They're probably covering more scratches. I wouldn't be surprised. But again, we're just going to rip all these off. We're going to try and tidy the bike up a little bit. You know, I'm not going to make it as nice as the Suzuki. I still want to have a little bit of appearance when it's going around a track. So probably going to respray the wheels. And then we'll probably move on to the bodywork. So that is what I'll show you next, is how bad it is. Now, bodywork, starting at the front, we can see, number one, no mirrors. Number two, a nice big crack in the front fairing there. A nice big scratch in the front fairing there. And just generally it looks a bit tatty. So I am probably going to be buying a new one of those, just so that when I redo the bodywork, it doesn't show up underneath the wrap, because my plan really for this bike is to wrap it rather than to spray it, because if I do take this down a track and it slides down, it's a hell of a lot easier to rewrap it than it is to repaint it. So again, moving on to the side fairings. This has obviously been laid down in its past because you've got marks on the end there, marks down the panel, all the way to the bottom of the fairing. So it's pretty evident it's been down on this side, and that matches nicely with the Acura exhaust I was talking about earlier that has a lovely big gouge outside of it. And also a nice big dent in the swing arm down there. So I need to find out if that is even safe to run. I don't actually know if it is, so we might have to change the swing arm over depending on sort of the consensus on the internet. The frame itself is actually in remarkably nice condition. There are no real massive marks, gouges, dents or scratches in it. So actually, I think that's quite a good win, as long as there's no cracks along the weld or anything. I think we've done okay. Now, fuel tank, where the aptly named Jizz Machine sticker sits. This doesn't look too bad. It's got sort of the normal sort of stone chips that you expect, and it's also got a few lighter scratches on the side down there. What the real issue with this fuel tank is the rust inside the tank. So again, as I sort of mentioned earlier, we're going to have to clean that out, empty the fuel out of the bike because that is now contaminated with water. But that was fine anyway, because we were going to be emptying the tank to clean it. So neither here nor there anymore. But again, it just sort of adds to that sort of tatty bodywork on the bike. And I think it will be a good experience kind of learning how to wrap, because I've never really wrapped anything before. And I think with a bike that already has pretty shoddy paintwork, why not? Let's give it a go. Now, same with the other side fairing. This one is nowhere near as bad. There's just a couple of little marks, one here, one here. That's actually probably quite savable if I was to respray it. But again, I think a wrap will do it really, really nice. And then finally, moving on to the back of the bike, we have the two rear tail fairings. Again, both actually surprisingly okay. There's a bit of damage on this one from where it went down on its side. But again, really nothing major. And the panel between the rear seat is actually cracked, so I might find a replacement one of those. But overall, the bike is what it is. It's a cheap track bike that has not really been looked after in the past. Yeah, it's a perfect base for me to start my track time and have a really solid base to do it on, and a bike that I've built and confident that works. So yeah, she definitely needs some work. She needs a bit of love and a little bit of TLC, but we'll get her there in absolutely no time. Okay, so that's about it for today's episode. It's quite a short one. It was more just to introduce the bike and its issues rather than have any sort of deep mechanical integrity. So now that you've met the Jizz Machine itself, next episode we're going to be working on the fuel system. That's kind of the first plan, is to get it running right. So as mentioned a few times, we're just going to completely overhaul that fuel system, make sure that there is no issues that side, see if we can diagnose that FI light on the dash. But again, that's going to be, sort of quite a big job. We've got to drain all the fuel system, drain the fuel tank, clean the fuel tank. And we're going to walk you through that in next week's episode, which we'll release on the 25th, if I'm correct. This is just going to be kind of a weekly, maybe 2 weekly mini series on the bike, prepping it for next year's track season. So if you guys kind of want to follow along, then please hit that subscribe button and follow along with the journey into making this a proper full-fledged track bike. So that's going to be it. Thanks very much all for watching once again. I hope this episode wasn't too boring, because again, it's just me talking, but it's kind of setting the precedent for what's to come in the future for this bike. So again, thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video around. Anything you do really, really helps at this stage. So until next time, thanks very much. See you then.
I wish we had healed us. That's the trouble with love.